The 27th of June, 1977, Duluth, Minnesota. A day nurse turns off London Road and drives toward a mansion perched above Lake Superior. 39 rooms, 12 acres, a private shoreline, the kind of estate that should feel protected by its own reputation. At 7 a.m., she steps inside for her shift, and she freezes. There is no sound, no footsteps upstairs, no radio, no clink of dishes, no soft voice from the kitchen. The air feels wrong, like the house is holding its breath. She walks forward anyway, calling out, "Nothing." She passes the formal rooms where everything is polished and heavy. She passes the library. She passes the breakfast room with green tile and morning light. Still nothing. Then she reaches the grand staircase. Velma Piatila, the night nurse, lies at the bottom steps, blood beneath her head. A brass candlestick nearby, bent and dull, like a tool dropped after finishing its job. The day nurse does not stop to understand. She runs upstairs. The bedroom door is open. Drawers are pulled out, contents dumped onto the floor. A jewelry box is missing. And in the bed is Elizabeth Mannering Congdon, 83 years old, partially paralyzed from a stroke, unable to fight back. She has been smothered with a satin pillow. 2 women dead in one night inside one of Minnesota's grandest homes. Police will call it robbery at first. A break-in, a thief panicked. But the mansion is full of valuables, and almost nothing is taken. So the question changes. If this was not random, then who wanted an old woman dead in her own bed? And who knew this house well enough to move through it in the dark? Hold on to that question, because the evidence will keep pulling this story inward toward people who knew this house. Chapter 1. The crime scene inside a legend. Glensheen was famous long before it became infamous. In Duluth, everyone knew the Congdon name, and everyone knew the house on the lake. It was a landmark, a symbol, a reminder that iron ore could turn into castles. That is why the first responders felt a strange hesitation when they arrived. Not fear, exactly, more like disbelief. This kind of violence belongs in alleys and bars, not on the staircase of a mansion. Inside, the scene forced reality. Velma Piatila had been attacked downstairs. The candlestick was not a clean weapon. It required repeated force, the kind of violence that takes time and commitment. Upstairs, Elizabeth lay in bed, covers pulled up with a neatness that felt almost obscene in a room that had been ransacked. She was partially paralyzed, speech impaired, dependent on nurses for everything. Whoever held that pillow over her face had to stand there for minutes. Minutes. That matters, because it means this was not a mistake, not a panic strike, not a burglar swinging in fear. This was a decision. Detectives photographed everything. The drawers pulled out, the jewelry scattered, the missing box. They noted what was gone and what was strangely untouched. In a house like Glensheen, a thief could have taken silver, art, antiques, furniture, even fabrics. Instead, the killer took only a small, portable collection. That did not look like greed. That looked like proof of a story someone wanted police to believe. Then they found the window. In the billiard room, there were signs of forced entry, but investigators noted the glass fragments were outside. Outside. That detail did not prove anything by itself. But it can be consistent with a window broken from inside the room because shards often travel outward rather than smashed from the yard. Staged scenes often fail on small, physical contradictions because the person staging is thinking about drama, not mechanics. So, investigators began to consider that the robbery might be a disguise. And once you suspect disguise, you ask a different question. Who benefits? Elizabeth Congdon had 2 adopted daughters. Both were heirs. Both had complicated histories inside a family that was wealthy but tightly controlled. Jennifer Susan Congdon was quiet, stable, careful. She lived like someone who knew money could disappear if you treated it carelessly. Marjorie Mannering Congdon was the opposite. Temperamental, demanding, famous in family circles for reckless spending and constant crises. As the morning turned to afternoon, detectives made calls that felt almost indecent on the day of a death. They called trustees and lawyers. They asked about wills, trusts, and inheritance. They asked who controlled what. That is when a chilling detail surfaced. In March 1977, law enforcement in Colorado had warned the Congdon trustees that Marjorie was looking for someone to kill her mother. 3 months later, her mother was dead. Suddenly, June 27 did not feel like a random night. It felt like the end of a countdown. To understand why, we have to go backward. To the fortune, to the house, and to the family pressure that lived inside those walls. Chapter 2. A house that makes people think it cannot bleed. Before we go any further, pause for a second and picture what Glensheen represented to Duluth in 1977. This was not just where a wealthy woman lived. It was where the city pointed when it wanted to show itself off. A mansion on the lake built by iron money. A place where governors, industrialists, and guests in their best clothes had once walked through formal rooms. A place that felt protected by its own symbolism. That is why the first public narrative mattered. Robbery, random, stranger. Because if the murders were random, then the world still made sense. It was terrible, but it was containable. A bad man entered from outside, did something evil, and left. But if the murders were personal, then the world did not make sense. Because personal means the danger came from inside the walls. Personal means the estate was not a fortress. Personal means wealth did not protect the family from itself. This case became a kind of psychological battle between those two stories. Stranger versus family, chaos versus design, bad luck versus a plan. And the investigators had to fight that battle with facts, not feelings. That is why they returned again and again to the same question. Who benefits? Because in a mansion full of valuables, the clearest theft was not jewelry. The clearest theft was time. If Elizabeth died, the clock stopped. Trusts moved. Paperwork activated. The power of attorney suddenly mattered. A future that was delayed became immediate. When people say this case was about money, they do not mean greed in the abstract. They mean the way money can turn into oxygen for someone who feels they are suffocating. And the moment you believe you are suffocating, you start looking for the fastest way to breathe. That is how desperation becomes dangerous. The question that mattered was simple. Was this chaos? Or was this design? And if it was design, who benefits? Chapter 3. The man who turned ore into a dynasty. Chester Adgate Congdon was born the 12th of June, 1853, in Rochester, New York, the son of a Methodist minister. He did not inherit wealth. He inherited discipline and the belief that effort matters. He attended Syracuse University in 1871 and met Clara Hesperia Bannister, also the child of a minister. Their early relationship was made of letters and patience because Chester could not marry without money. He studied law, he passed the bar, he struggled. He wrote letters describing himself as second-rate. He joked about becoming a cowboy. People joke like that when they are afraid life will never become what they hoped. In 1879, he moved to St. Paul, Minnesota, opened a law practice, and slowly built a reputation. He connected with William Bissell, a powerful federal attorney, became his assistant, and finally married Clara in 1881. They built a family, Walter in 1883, Edward in 1885, a biological daughter named Marjorie in 1887, a son named John Robert. More children followed. It was a busy, expensive life, the kind of life where money feels like a constant question. In 1892, Bissell offered Chester opportunity in Duluth. The Mesabi Range had been discovered, and northern Minnesota was turning into an industrial engine. Lawyers were needed to handle claims and leases and disputes. Chester moved his family north. Tragedy followed quickly. Their young son, John Robert, died of scarlet fever in 1893. Grief hit hard, but the world did not pause. Chester kept working. Clara kept running the home. In 1894, another daughter was born, Elizabeth. In 1898, a son, Robert. Chester's legal career grew, but the real breakthrough came from iron ore and the men who controlled it. The Mesabi Range was one of the richest iron deposits on Earth. Early investors dismissed it, then demand grew, and dismissal turned into hunger. Henry Oliver, a major steel figure, needed legal representation in Minnesota. Through scheduling and chance, he ended up meeting Chester Congdon. They connected immediately. Oliver proposed that Chester act as his agent in Minnesota, handling mining property and legal work. In exchange, Chester would receive fees and stock. Stock is how people become rich when consolidation happens. And consolidation did happen. In 1901, major iron interests were consolidated into United States Steel, the first billion-dollar corporation. Those who held the right shares at the right moment watched their wealth explode. Chester Congdon was one of those people. He expanded investments into more mining properties and processing ventures. He diversified. By the early 1900s, He was among the wealthiest men in Minnesota. Then he decided to build a statement, a home that said permanence, a home that would anchor the family name, a home that would outlast him. That home would be Glensheen. Chapter 4. Building Glensheen to Feel Eternal. Chester and Clara chose 12 acres along Lake Superior. The property was wooded and rugged, framed by ravines. In the early 1900s, it was far from downtown Duluth, quiet and private. They hired Clarence H. Johnston, Sr., one of Minnesota's leading architects. They chose Jacobean Revival, inspired by English country estates, brick and stone, chimneys, gables, a look that suggested age and stability. For the landscape, they hired Charles W. Levitt, Jr. The grounds were designed to preserve natural vegetation while shaping it into terraces, gardens, and paths down to the lake. It was meant to feel like a private world. Construction began in 1905 and lasted nearly 4 years. Glensheen would have 39 rooms and roughly 20,000 square feet of living space. Behind the public rooms, it was modern for its time. Hidden tunnels, central systems, and redundant lighting engineering meant to make the estate feel self-sufficient. Inside, the house was craftsmanship turned into philosophy. Different woods for different rooms. Doors designed with 2 faces, one matching the hallway, one matching the interior room. Symbols repeated, lions for strength, pineapples for hospitality. The house told a story with details so subtle, most visitors never noticed them. The breakfast room became famous, green tile and stained glass catching the morning light. The library was designed for long afternoons. The dining room for gatherings where silver and candlelight performed wealth without speaking it. On the 24th of November 1908, the Congdons moved in. Chester had built a palace, but palaces do not guarantee peace. Sometimes they create pressure, because when a house is that magnificent, every family conflict becomes magnified. And decades later, those same corridors would become the quiet path between 2 deaths. Chester died in 1916, only 63, from a pulmonary embolism. Clara lived on for decades, maintaining Glensheen almost as a form of devotion, preserving Chester's vision. When Clara died in 1950 at 96, the estate passed to Elizabeth, the daughter who stayed closest, and the story shifted from building a legacy to living under it. Chapter 5. Elizabeth and the Adopted Daughters. Elizabeth Congdon never married. She stayed at Glensheen, first as her mother's companion, later as the owner. Living alone in 39 rooms is not romantic. It is echoing. Staff can keep a house running, but staff cannot fill the silence. In 1932, Elizabeth adopted a baby girl named Jacqueline Barnes and renamed her Marjorie Mannering Congdon. In 1935, she adopted another infant girl, Jennifer Susan Congdon. The mansion had children again. For a while, it looked like a solution. There were toys in rooms built for formal entertaining. There were growing girls learning to live inside a world of privilege and expectations. But adoption does not erase human complexity. It does not guarantee gratitude. It does not protect a family from resentment. Jennifer grew into someone steady and quiet. Marjorie grew into someone volatile and demanding. From a young age, she treated money as if it were air. Invisible, endless, required. And here is what made it worse. The Congdon money was controlled through trusts. Trustees had authority to approve or deny distributions. They could say no. Their job was to protect the principal for the long term. Marjorie hated the word no. In 1951, at 19, Marjorie married Richard Loy. They had 7 children. 7. That alone should have forced maturity. But Marjorie did not do maturity. She did chaos. She spent beyond their means. She created emergencies. Richard tried to keep up. The marriage collapsed under financial stress and emotional warfare. They divorced in 1970. During those years, Marjorie returned to Elizabeth again and again for money. Elizabeth paid repeatedly because she could not watch her grandchildren suffer. Love can be used as leverage. Marjorie learned how to pull that lever. In 1964, Elizabeth suffered a massive stroke. She became partially paralyzed and speech impaired. She lived in her second-floor bedroom, dependent on nurses for constant care. In 1968, Elizabeth donated Glensheen to the University of Minnesota, Duluth, retaining a life estate so she could live there until death. After she died, the university would operate the mansion as a museum, preserving it. It was a practical choice. The estate was expensive. Few families could afford to maintain such a property in the modern era. But that donation also meant something else. It meant Marjorie would never fully control Glensheen. She would inherit money, but she would not inherit the palace. Control was slipping away. By the mid-1970s, Marjorie's life unraveled further. She left most of her children behind and moved to Colorado in 1975. It was a decision that revealed her priorities, a fresh start for herself, even if it meant abandoning the stability her children needed. In Colorado, she met Roger Caldwell. Roger was recently divorced and struggling financially. He was not wealthy, not powerful, not impressive on paper, but he was willing. And willingness is what a controlling person needs most. They married quickly in 1976. They dreamed up a horse ranch, a reinvention that would prove they did not need the Congdon trustees. It failed. Foreclosure, repossession, plans collapsing before they really began. They moved into a hotel in Golden, Colorado, because they could not qualify for a normal lease. Hotel living was expensive, but it did not require credit or stability. You pay week to week, you survive. Marjorie received around $22,000 a year from a trust. In 1977, that could support a modest life. But Marjorie had never lived modestly. To her, $22,000 was an insult compared to the fortune she believed she deserved. By spring 1977, the hotel bills mounted. Credit was burned. Nobody would lend them money. The trustees refused more distributions. This is when desperation turns into planning. In March 1977, law enforcement in Colorado contacted the Congdon trustees with information that Marjorie was looking for someone to kill her mother. The trustees increased security at Glensheen. Elizabeth refused to believe her daughter would do such a thing. She insisted it was a misunderstanding. But the warning existed. And then, 3 days before the murders, Marjorie signed a power of attorney authorizing Roger to receive about $2.5 million of her expected inheritance. You do not sign a document like that unless you believe money is about to arrive. Then Roger disappeared for a weekend. And on Monday morning, June 27, the mansion became a crime scene. Chapter 6. The money that was supposed to prevent disaster. Trusts are built to do one thing: prevent a fortune from being destroyed by one person. The Congdon fortune was protected by trustees because the family had seen enough history to know that wealth invites risk, not only from strangers but from relatives who believe the money belongs to them personally. In a healthy family, a trust feels like structure. In an unhealthy family, a trust feels like a cage. For Jennifer, the trust structure was normal. She lived within it. She understood that income was provided and the principal was protected. For Marjorie, the trust structure was humiliation. She believed the money was hers. Being told no by trustees felt like being told she was a child, and Marjorie did not tolerate feeling like a child. It is important to understand this, not to excuse her, but to understand how motive builds. Marjorie did not suddenly become angry in 1977. She carried resentment for years. Resentment that the family did not accept her fully. Resentment that she did not control the fortune. Resentment that Jennifer seemed to fit better into the Congdon image. Over time, resentment turns into a story people tell themselves. The story might be, I am owed. The story might be, I am trapped. The story might be, they are withholding what is mine. The story might be, I have no choice. When law enforcement in Colorado warned the trustees in March 1977, that warning was not just about a threat. It was about the story Marjorie may have been telling herself out loud. And then, the power of attorney was signed days before the murders. Again, that timing is not proof of murder, but it is a psychological signal. It is the kind of step you take when you believe a transition is coming, when you believe your life is about to change, when you want to make sure someone else can collect on your behalf the moment the door opens. If you wanted to summarize the motive in one sentence, it might be this. Marjorie was not trying to become richer. She was trying to stop being controlled. Chapter 7. The missing weekend and the return with injuries. The weekend before the murders matters because it is where the timeline either breaks or proves itself. On June 24 through June 26, Roger Caldwell vanished from the hotel. A note was left for Marjorie's teenage son, Rick. It claimed Roger and Marjorie would be with real estate agents all weekend. It left a small amount of cash, like a parent trying to look responsible. One of the eeriest parts of this case is how ordinary some details feel. But investigators later learned the real estate agent saw Marjorie, not Roger. For 3 days, Roger could not be placed. He had no clear witnesses, no records, no trail. That is not proof of murder, but it is a perfect space to hide a trip. On Monday, after the murders were discovered, Roger returned to the hotel in Colorado. He had bruises on his face and cuts on his hands. Marjorie told people a horse had kicked him. The story sounded ridiculous. The injuries looked like someone had fought with a person, not with a horse. And the timing was too perfect. Police in Minnesota began contacting authorities in Colorado. They started building a profile of the Caldwells' finances. They found the power of attorney. They found the motel struggles. They found the pattern of desperate requests to trustees. Then the killer made the kind of mistake that makes investigators quietly smile. A paper trail. A Byzantine gold coin from Elizabeth's collection was mailed to a coin dealer for appraisal. The return address belonged to Roger Caldwell. In a murder case, you can survive for a long time if you leave no physical link, but you cannot survive if you mail stolen property with your name attached. Police searched the Caldwells' hotel room and found jewelry consistent with items missing from Glensheen. They found a wicker basket matching the missing container. Roger claimed the jewelry was a gift. But gifts do not appear in a hotel room immediately after a double murder. Then came the fingerprint. Roger's thumbprint was on the envelope used to mail the coin. Now investigators had motive, opportunity, stolen property, and a physical link. In early July 1977, Roger Caldwell was arrested for the murders. Marjorie was arrested for conspiracy and aiding and abetting. The case moved to court, where evidence becomes a story told out loud, and sometimes what feels obvious outside a courtroom becomes complicated inside it. Chapter 8. The robbery story, the staging, and the facts that wouldn't bend. In true crime, people often say, just follow the evidence. But in real investigations, evidence is not a clean trail. It is a pile of fragments. Some pieces shout, some whisper, some lie. After the murders, detectives had a problem that seems backwards. They had a mansion full of objects, but only a few objects mattered. They had a dramatic scene, but drama does not equal truth. So they focused on what could be measured. First, the staging indicators. The forced entry story depended on the billiard room window. It looked like a burglar came in, moved through the first floor, then went upstairs. But the glass pattern raised doubt. If the window was broken from the inside, then it could be a prop, a way to make the crime look random. That is why staging is so powerful. It buys time. It pushes investigators toward unknown strangers, while the real suspects stand in plain sight. Second, the theft story. A jewelry box was missing, and items from Elizabeth's collection were later traced to Roger Caldwell. That suggests theft occurred. But theft can be both motive and disguise. A person planning a murder for inheritance can still take jewelry as a secondary payoff, or they can take it to support the burglary narrative, or both. The real question was not, did something get stolen? The real question was, did the theft explain the murders? Third, the time and effort involved. Velma Pietila was attacked with a candlestick. That is intimate, physical violence. It is also loud. A candlestick on a skull is not silent. It creates impact. It suggests the attacker was willing to risk noise. Elizabeth was smothered with a pillow. That is quiet. It is close. It requires sustained pressure. Those two methods together are not the typical signature of a frantic burglar. They suggest a person who adapted. When confronted downstairs, they used force. When confronted upstairs, they used silence. The killer made sure. Fourth, the getaway behavior. Velma Pietila's car was found in an airport parking lot with keys inside. That detail is almost cinematic. It suggests a killer who wanted investigators to imagine a flight, a stranger who vanished into the sky. But in reality, it is also a way to move a vehicle away from the mansion and away from whatever evidence might have been in or on it. It is misdirection and cleanup at the same time. Those were the scene facts. Then came the personal facts. Investigators learned about the Caldwells' financial desperation, hotel living, foreclosure, denied requests from trustees, a lifestyle that demanded more than their income could provide. They learned about the power of attorney signed days before the murders, authorizing Roger to receive a large share of Marjorie's expected inheritance. They learned about the warning from Colorado months earlier. They also learned about earlier incidents that made the family situation feel darker than most outsiders realized. There had been a suspicious house fire in Marine on Street, Croy. tied to Marjorie's past questions, investigators and later reporting raised, but never conclusively proved. According to later accounts and testimony described during the investigation, Elizabeth once became violently ill after eating marmalade Marjorie had brought. Medical testing at the time was reported to show drugs not among Elizabeth's prescriptions, but the jar later disappeared and could not be independently tested. On their own, details like these were not courtroom proof, but to investigators, they suggested a pattern. And patterns matter to investigators, because patterns tell you what a person is capable of when pressure rises. Still, investigators could not simply present a pattern and ask a jury to convict. They needed links. Chapter 9. The coin in the envelope, the kind of mistake that ends a case. In many murder investigations, the hardest part is not finding suspects. It is finding a hard link. A hard link is something physical that refuses to be explained away. A fingerprint, a possession, a record, a witness who has no reason to lie. The coin dealer in Colorado provided one of those hard links. When the Byzantine gold coin arrived for appraisal with Roger Caldwell's return address, it did something to the case instantly. It collapsed distance. Suddenly, the murders were not only a Minnesota story, they were a Colorado story too. The coin suggested that something from Glensheen had traveled back to the Caldwells' world, and because the coin was mailed, it created a paper trail. This is where criminals often fail, not because they cannot commit violence, but because they cannot resist converting stolen objects into cash. The moment you try to convert, you expose yourself. Search warrants followed. Jewelry was found. Items consistent with Elizabeth's collection. Pieces that could be photographed and presented to a jury. And then, the fingerprint on the envelope. A thumbprint is not a rumor. It is not a family feud. It is not a personality assessment. It is a piece of the body left behind. This is why the envelope mattered so much. It was as if Roger had signed his own name under the word stolen. From the outside, it feels unbelievable that someone would make that mistake. But people make these mistakes all the time because they believe their staging has already won. They believe the robbery narrative will keep police chasing strangers. They believe the mansion's public image will protect them. They forget that detectives do not investigate images. They investigate contradictions. And the contradiction here was simple. If the killer was a stranger, why was a coin from Glensheen being mailed from a Colorado hotel by the husband of the primary heir? Chapter 10. The first trial and the weight of circumstances. Because of intense publicity, Roger's trial was moved away from Duluth. The idea was simple. Find jurors who had not been saturated by headlines. The prosecution built their case piece by piece. They showed the jewelry found in Roger's possession. They showed the basket. They showed how stolen property moved. They showed the envelope and the fingerprint. They pointed to Roger's injuries. They pointed to the missing weekend. They pointed to the power of attorney. They painted the motive clearly. Money, millions. The defense did what defense attorneys must do when the evidence is heavy. They attacked each piece and tried to create a new possibility. They suggested the jewelry could have been given to Roger. They suggested the fingerprint might have been placed innocently. They suggested the injuries were from a horse kick, as Marjorie claimed. They hammered the lack of travel records, insisting it was impossible for Roger to make the trip without leaving proof. They even suggested a frame-up. Other Congdon family members stood to benefit from Elizabeth's death, so perhaps they arranged it and planted clues to implicate Roger. It sounded desperate, but a jury does not need to believe the frame-up fully. They only need to feel doubt. Still, the cumulative weight of the evidence was crushing. Too many coincidences. Too many lies. Too much physical connection. In 1978, the jury convicted Roger Caldwell of first-degree murder. 2 life sentences. For many people, that was closure. Then came Marjorie's trial, and closure cracked. Chapter 11. Marjorie's trial and the power of performance. Marjorie Congdon Caldwell went on trial in 1979. Her case was different because the evidence against her was different. She did not have her fingerprint on an envelope. She did not have stolen property as directly tied to her hands. She was suspected as the planner, the mind, the person who made the motive real. And planners are harder to convict because planning often happens in private. Marjorie understood something important. A courtroom is a stage. She presented herself as calm and soft. She knitted in court. She looked like a grieving daughter caught in a nightmare created by a violent husband. People who watched described her demeanor as almost gentle. The prosecution tried to break that image. They pointed to her financial desperation, the hotel situation, the denied requests from trustees, the warning from Colorado, the power of attorney signed days before the murders. They also introduced disturbing allegations about Marjorie's past, incidents suggesting she was capable of violence when money was involved. Testimony from her daughter Rebecca Loy describing fear in their home. It painted a picture, but pictures are not proof. The defense attacked the prosecution where it was vulnerable. They challenged key evidence from Roger's trial, including expert disagreement about the fingerprint on the envelope. They highlighted gaps in travel proof. They emphasized that motive is not action. They pushed the narrative that Roger acted alone, driven by his own greed, while Marjorie remained unaware. The jury acquitted Marjorie of all charges. Afterward, some jurors even socialized with her. It was extraordinary, a sign that they did not see her as dangerous. The verdict shattered the Congdon family. 4 of Marjorie's children filed a civil suit, contesting her right to inherit. Civil court has a lower burden of proof, but criminal acquittals still carry emotional weight. Eventually, a compromise limited Marjorie to around $40,000 a year in trust income. If she had killed for millions, she would never truly touch the millions. But the story was not over, because Roger's conviction did not survive the appeal process. In 1982, the Minnesota Supreme Court overturned his conviction and ordered a new trial based on new information that had surfaced during Marjorie's trial. Prosecutors faced a brutal choice: retry Roger and risk losing the entire case, or make a deal and guarantee a confession. They made the deal. On the 5th of July 1983, Roger Caldwell confessed to both murders. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was released after time served. A confessed killer walked free, and the public learned a hard truth about the justice system. Sometimes the system values certainty of conviction more than the severity of punishment. Roger lived for several more years. On the 18th of May 1988, he died by suicide. He left no note that settled the question of Marjorie's involvement. And because of double jeopardy, Marjorie could never be tried again. The legal story was finished. The human story was not. Chapter 12. The courtroom years and the moment everything flipped. For the public, Roger Caldwell's conviction in 1978 felt like the end. For lawyers, it was the beginning of the next stage. Appeals, motions, new evidence claims. In criminal law, the fight often continues for years. During Marjorie's 1979 trial, information emerged that Roger's defense later argued was not available in 1978. Details, testimony, and disputes that could have influenced the first jury. One of the key battles centered on the fingerprint evidence. A thumbprint on an envelope sounds definitive, but experts can disagree about interpretation, quality, and certainty. If an expert can persuade an appeals court that evidence was overstated or improperly handled, the conviction can be questioned. Another battle centered on timeline testimony, including witness claims about Roger's whereabouts. Even when such testimony is later recanted or discredited, its existence can complicate the legal record. The Minnesota Supreme Court overturned Roger's conviction in 1982 and ordered a new trial. This is the moment the case became a gamble. From the outside, people ask, why not just try him again? Because prosecutors do not retry cases in a vacuum. They retry cases with the knowledge that juries can surprise you, that witnesses can crumble, that evidence can be attacked, that a defense strategy only needs one juror to hold. The prosecution faced a choice: risk an acquittal that would end any possibility of punishment, or offer a plea that would lock in guilt and end the case. They offered the plea. On the 5th of July 1983, Roger Caldwell confessed to both murders. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. He was released after time served. To the public, it felt like a betrayal. To the legal system, it felt like damage control. Roger had been convicted once. Now, after reversal, prosecutors could not be sure they could convict again. The plea ensured a guilty record and a confession. It also ensured something else: that Roger would carry the narrative alone. For years, people wondered whether Roger would someday implicate Marjorie more directly. Would he describe planning conversations, instructions, promises? He did not. And in 1988, he ended his life, leaving no note. The question remained: if Marjorie was involved, how could she live with it? The answer may be that she did not live with guilt in the way normal people imagine guilt. Some people reframe reality until it fits their needs. Some people see themselves as entitled to do what they do. Some people compartmentalize, or maybe And this is the possibility some people cling to. She truly did not plan it. She simply created the conditions. Desperation, resentment, pressure. And Roger acted alone. But many observers struggle to believe that, because the plot served Marjorie so neatly and because the warning from Colorado existed before the murders. Years later, a piece of evidence was described in a way that sounded like confirmation. Some reporting claimed the disputed envelope was later DNA tested, with results reported as consistent with Roger Caldwell at a very high probability. I'm using reported deliberately here because this detail is often cited secondhand. That did not change Marjorie's legal status. Nothing could. But it strengthened the idea that Roger was present in the theft trail. It also reinforced the frustration. Even when a case grows clearer, the law cannot reopen what it has closed. Chapter 13. The Long Aftermath and the Mansion as Museum. Marjorie continued living on trust income. She maintained her innocence regarding the murders. She framed herself as a victim of her husband's violence and her family's prejudice. But many observers believed she was involved. The timing of the power of attorney, the warning from Colorado, the pattern of financial desperation. The idea that Roger, alone, designed a complex inheritance plot without guidance. Belief, however, is not conviction. The system had spoken. Over the following decades, Marjorie faced legal trouble for other crimes, including arson and fraud. The pattern of suspicious incidents continued. The woman who beat a double murder charge could not stay out of trouble for lesser offenses. Her children remained estranged. Rebecca, who testified against her, never reconciled. The family division never healed. Jennifer, Marjorie's adopted sister, lived a quiet life. She maintained stable relationships and did not become a headline. The contrast between the two adopted daughters was stark. Meanwhile, Glensheen opened as a museum in July 1979, operated by the University of Minnesota, Duluth, as Elizabeth had arranged. At first, guides were instructed not to mention the murders. The goal was to preserve architecture and history, not to turn the home into a dark tourism attraction. But visitors knew, everyone knew. People asked, guides answered. Over time, the murders became part of the narrative, not sensationalized, but acknowledged. Because you cannot stand at that staircase without imagining Velma Piatilla's last moments. You cannot look at that bedroom without picturing a pillow pressed down in silence. Glensheen became a place where two stories live in the same rooms. The story of wealth and ambition and craftsmanship, and the story of what greed can do inside a family when money feels like a prison. Chester Congdon built Glensheen to last for generations. In a way, it did. The house survived. The gardens survived. The rooms remain remarkably intact. But the family inside fractured. Two women died on the 27th of June, 1977. A man was convicted, then freed after confessing. A daughter was acquitted and protected forever by law. And the mansion kept standing, looking out over Lake Superior, as if it had seen everything and refused to speak. If there is a lesson, it is not simple. Legacy is fragile. You can build a palace and still fail to build peace. You can lock money behind trusts and still fail to protect the people living under that money's shadow. And you can stage a robbery, break a window, scatter jewelry, move a car to an airport, but you cannot stage innocence forever. Not in public memory. Not in the quiet way a house holds on to what happened inside it. Glensheen remains, and so does the question that started this story. Who benefits, and what would they do to collect? Chapter 14. The Night Inside the House, What We Can Say Without Inventing. Whenever a famous crime happens in a famous place, the human mind tries to create a movie. We want to see the killer step through shadows. We want to hear the creak of a stair. We want a single moment when everything turns. But the honest version of this night is simpler and colder. We know two women died. We know the weapons. We know some staging occurred. We know what was taken and what was left. The rest, unless a living witness tells it, must be handled carefully. So here is what investigators could reasonably infer. Someone entered Glensheen at night, whether through a window, a door, or with a key. The person moved through the house with enough confidence to reach the second-floor bedroom. That confidence matters. Glensheen was not a small house. It was a maze of rooms and hallways, built to impress but also to confuse outsiders. A stranger can get lost. A person familiar with the layout does not. The night nurse, Velma Piatilla, was on duty. Night nurses learn the rhythm of a house. They hear small changes. a door that should be closed, a footstep that does not belong. At some point, something drew Velma downstairs. Maybe she heard a sound. Maybe she saw movement. Maybe she simply checked the first floor as part of her routine. Downstairs, she was attacked with a brass candlestick. This was not an accidental blow. The force required is significant. The choice of weapons suggests the attacker grabbed what was available, not what was planned. After the attack, the killer moved upstairs again. Elizabeth Congdon was in bed. She could not run. She could not fight effectively. She was partially paralyzed and speech impaired. The killer used a pillow to smother her. A pillow is quiet, but smothering is not instant. The killer had to keep pressure until breathing stopped, then keep it a little longer to be sure. Then the killer staged. Drawers were pulled out. Jewelry was scattered. A jewelry box was removed. A window was broken in a way that did not match a natural break-in. Velma's car was moved and left at an airport parking lot with keys inside, a detail that suggested escape by flight, a stranger vanishing. This sequence, taken together, points to intention, not necessarily sophistication, because truly sophisticated criminals do not mail stolen coins from a famous murder. They do not create an envelope that carries a fingerprint. They do not store stolen jewelry in a hotel room where police can search. What we see here is something more common, a plan with holes. A person who believed staging would direct investigators away from family, away from money, away from the people closest to the victim. For a short time, the plan worked. The first public story was burglary, but reality pushed back, because reality leaves traces. Traces in paper, traces in possessions, traces in human behavior when money is involved. Chapter 15. Why this case still grabs people decades later. Most murders do not become legend, even tragic ones. So why does this one still grip people? Part of it is the location. Glensheen is not a normal house. It is a place built to impress. When violence enters a place like that, it feels like a violation of an unspoken agreement. We believe wealth buys distance from chaos. We believe grand homes are protected. This story proves they are not. Part of it is the archetype. An heiress in a mansion. A nurse killed on a staircase. A family member suspected. A husband blamed. A trial. An acquittal. A confession. A release. It reads like fiction, but it is real. Part of it is the moral discomfort. The legal outcome does not match the emotional desire for justice. Roger confessed and still walked free after time served. Marjorie was acquitted and protected forever from retrial. People are left with unresolved anger, and unresolved anger is fuel for obsession. Part of it is the psychology of inheritance. This case forces a question many families avoid. What happens when love and money become inseparable? When a child grows up believing money is not only comfort, but identity. When control of money becomes control of self. When denial and resentment build for years, quietly, in a house filled with beautiful rooms. That pressure can make ordinary conflict feel life or death. And once conflict feels life or death, terrible choices become easier to imagine. The final reason is the house itself. Glensheen remained intact. Visitors can still walk the halls. They can still see the staircase. They can still stand in rooms that look almost exactly as they looked in 1977. That physical continuity makes the past feel close. It makes people think, if I stand here long enough, maybe the house will tell me what it knows. But houses do not talk. They only hold. They hold the beauty and the horror in the same walls. And that is why this story does not fade. Because it is not only about what happened, it is about where it happened, and what that place was supposed to represent. A legacy, safety, a dynasty. Instead, it became a reminder that human desire can be stronger than any stone. And that is the most unsettling part. Glensheen was built to last. It did, but nothing in the Congdon family was built to withstand what money did to them. Chapter 16. The Last Hook, What You Should Remember. If you remember one thing from this story, let it be this. The murders did not begin on the 27th of June, 1977. They began years earlier, in smaller moments. A request for money that was denied, a crisis that was exaggerated, a boundary that was pushed, a resentment that was fed, a belief that someone else was holding what was yours. Those are not crimes, but they are the soil where crimes grow. Chester Congdon built Glensheen out of wealth created by ore and opportunity. He designed it to be a gift to his family, a symbol of what he had achieved. Elizabeth inherited it and tried to preserve it. She adopted children, tried to create continuity, tried to turn the mansion into a home. But money changes a home. It can make people feel entitled. It can make people feel trapped. It can make love conditional. And when love is conditional, violence becomes easier to rationalize. 2 women died that night. Elizabeth, the elderly heiress. Velma, the working nurse who was simply doing her job. The tragedy is not only that they were killed, the tragedy is that their deaths became part of a longer story of legal battles, family fractures, and a question that never fully closes. Was it one killer, or was it a plan? Legally, the answer is finished. Emotionally, it never will be. That is why Glensheen still feels different to visitors. They come for architecture and leave thinking about human nature. Because the most frightening thing about this story is not the candlestick or the pillow. It is the idea that the motive was not hatred, it was desire. And desire can live quietly for years before it finally acts. The mansion is still there on the shore of Lake Superior. 39 rooms, 12 acres, a beautiful place. And a place where silence once meant everything. If you want more cases where we follow the paper, the motives, and the contradictions like this one, please like the video and subscribe. It helps the channel reach more viewers, and it tells me to keep making episodes like this. And